And it looks like we're live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Alberto Villafan. I'm the digital producer over at Sahan Journal. And today, we're going to be talking about the evolving changes to immigration policies that are affecting international students in Minnesota. I'm joined with two fantastic guests who are going to help us better understand just what the heck is happening right now. And I think I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Hannah, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'd love to. My name is Hannah Ward. I'm an investigative reporter at the Minnesota Daily, which is the campus newspaper for the University of Minnesota community. This semester, I've spent a lot of time covering recent immigration news that's relevant to students and other people at the University of Minnesota.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And then over on the other microphone, we have David Wilson. David, you want to say hi to the people?
Hi, I'm David Wilson. I'm a lawyer here in Minneapolis, and I'm fighting a lot of government power and on behalf of students these days. That's a short version.
We appreciate you very much. Thank you guys both so much for coming here today. Hope you guys are all very excited to hear what they have to say. We are very happy to have them here. If you do have questions for our guests, please send them into the chat. I'll be happy to ask them to our panelists near the end of our interview. It's going to be taking an hour, so expect that around like 12:45. For the past few months, the Han Journal and several other news outlets have reported on several international students having their visas revoked, being detained by ICE at their homes, outside, for charges more than half a decade old, right? Things for like protesting, graffiti, DWIs. That's a lot. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of things going on. So, David, Hannah, as simply as possible, if that's even possible, can you tell me what the heck is happening to international students in Minnesota? Hannah, can I have you go first?
Sure. International students at the University of Minnesota are afraid because the federal government has been revoking visas, which prompts fear on its own, but some of those students who are affected are at the University of Minnesota, so it's an issue really close to home. And there have been at least 2 University of Minnesotans who are suing, and one who was the first who was detained is in custody at the Sherburne County Jail, I think. So there's a lot of concern from the student body and the faculty and anyone who's an international student or scholar.
David, your turn. What are you seeing? What's going on right now?
Well, I think there's 2 versions of it. There's the first version where the student is, targeted by ICE for either a visa revocation then tied to something else, say a public safety argument or a foreign policy argument. And then you see the paper version or the electronic version where records that are tied to students called the SEVIS registration are just being turned off because of a random background check match. Some of it seems to be instigated by the Department of State. Maybe it's ICE. They can't seem to agree on who's to blame for this.
Real quick, can you define what SEVIS is for our audience?
Sure. SEVIS is the Student Exchange Visitor Information System. It's basically a response to 9/11. So in 2001, there was legislation started rolling out in response to what happened in 9/11. And a lot of that was a lot of the people involved in 9/11 had student visas, either F, J, or M visas. And they were able to walk away from their programs and no one was tracking them. And as a consequence, Congress responded. They wanted something electronic and they wanted to be able to find when a student doesn't show up, doesn't enroll. This played out also in the Boston bombing, where CBP had missed that student visas they had stopped going to school, and so the SEVIS data wasn't updating fast enough. And so there was this system really created for monitoring, and it's so the school is supposed to update changes in the program, where the student lives, if they drop out, if they fail to enroll, things like that. And ICE is just supposed to track the data. So when someone doesn't show up, they're alerted, and they can go looking for the person because they're worried about the person going off the grid. The system, though, now has been used by ICE to look for data about students and then to match it to a general database on criminal records. It's known as the NCIC. And that link is what's causing all the issues, because now ICE is reacting to the data and just unilaterally terminating people in the system. The CVIS registration, though, is kind of the lifeblood of a student status. It allows them to register for class, change their address, maybe go into a graduate program or get practical training authorization down the road. When the school can't maintain that, then the student is like driving off a cliff. The road has gone underneath them, and they're essentially going to fall down to the bottom below and be out of status. And that's where all the a lot of the paper hubbub is coming from.
Can I ask you how many students are you aware of how many international students are in Minnesota?
That I don't know. There's so many schools that have international students. You have high schools that have international students. You also have, on top of that, you do have trainees. They're on J1 visas. Researchers, for example, at the University of Minnesota, a lot of them are on J1 visas, not F1 visas. You have M1 visas where vocational trainings. So pilots, for example, pilot schools. We have one in Egan. That's an M1 program. So those programs, the volume of students, it's in the thousands at this point.
And it's not just university students, like at the University of Minnesota. It's not just undergrads. It's multiple kinds of schools, not just colleges, right?
Oh, well, we know of Mankato, St. Cloud, Metropolitan State, Concordia, the University of Minnesota, Augsburg. I know of at least one in Augsburg. I don't know of any at St. Thomas, but it's all over, this issue.
Hannah, we asked you to talk to some international students, and you've definitely spoken to some in some of your previous reporting. Do you think the students that you've spoken with could echo that road falling underneath them?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Even for students who haven't had their records terminated, the issue is that so many students don't know why this is happening. Even the employees at the International Students and Scholar Service at the University of Minnesota don't know why records were being terminated from CVIS. So for students who have had past criminal convictions, even if they're minor, it's a very fearful time. I haven't been able to speak with any students who have had their CVIS records terminated. I'm not sure who they are or where to find them, but I know for all international students that I've spoken with, even if they don't have any minor criminal, offenses in their past, it's a really scary time.
I'm sorry. So, can you repeat that last bit for me? Something about minor offenses?
Yeah, like with a lot of students who have had their records terminated, they have had that been explained for having a drunk driving offense or other minor or misdemeanors, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
Real quick to both of you. I'm going to have to ask you both to speak up where I'm being told that some of our audience is having a hard time hearing you. So just speak a little louder, a little bigger. You need that from me?
Sure, I can be
Yes.
really loud, I guess. I can pinpoint that a little better. And the connection is to data. The NCIC system doesn't get a record that shows up in the FBI system unless it's an arrest or a citation that's a misdemeanor or higher. So traffic tickets by themselves normally wouldn't do it. The pattern seems to be person gets stopped, has some kind of insurance issue that may be a misdemeanor, no proof of insurance or driving after suspension or no Minnesota driver's license, for example. And when that happens, then they're put in the system because local police records the offense, has a case number, and that's what NCIC is really about. It's about tracking contacts with law enforcement. And once that's there, it doesn't matter if the case is ultimately dismissed, prosecution says this is stupid, we get rid of the case. if that contact is enough to trigger that link. And so in some cases, there have been, I have two, where the first contact, the one that's putting the person in NCIC, is dismissed. The case goes nowhere. The prosecution realizes it's a non-case. And their other contacts are literally infractions, ordinance violations for parking. We were talking earlier about having your car towed, that kind of stuff. But that seems to be what sets it off, is that initial contact that's slightly higher, and doesn't matter what happens. It's just the contact that's causing it. It's not the conviction.
So, if I remember right, some smaller schools like MSU Mankato, they tend to have a lot of international students, right?
Right.
How are these arrests, detainments of international students maybe rippling towards other students? You know, can you help me understand that? Is it, because what are the ripple effects here, if any?
Do you mean for how other students are feeling
How are
on
other students
campus?
feeling about this? Yeah.
I would say there was a lot of like initial shock and concern when the first student was detained by ICE. And since then, there have been a few protests that have broke out, both on campus and with some students showing up in front of the federal courthouse. But it hasn't been as widespread as some other issues, or it's not translating to like mobilizing in the form of protests on campus. Just to compare it to last spring, the University of Minnesota saw a lot of protests pro-Palestine in the form of like encampments or gatherings on campus, and that saw like turnout of hundreds of students. With this, there is a much smaller turnout. There's much less, I want to say, motivation to have longer protests. I went to one just recently, and it was over in 30 minutes because the turnout was maybe 20 or 30 people, most of whom are already involved in activist groups. So it's not engaging with most of the student body. But I know there is concern. The impression that I get is most students don't feel it's something that protesting on campus can make changes for what's happening, because it's the federal government is how they see it.
Well, the school's a victim in this instance, right? I mean, that's what's happening. It's like you can't protest the school. The school's not doing it. They're actually trying to help.
Yeah.
But they also have a mandate. They have to comply with their program. Otherwise, they can lose their accreditation. So CVIS is a voluntary program. Schools don't have to do it, but if they don't do it, they can't have international students. So, but they also can't then really piss off ICE and lose all their international students. So it puts them in a really hard position. Argue for one, but lose them all, or kind of be quiet and try to help, but do so in the shadows because their hands are somewhat tied. They're trying to protect their entire student body. It's a really untenable position for any school administrator to be in. And I can understand why schools wouldn't want to invite any more investigations into the school. I think the University of Minnesota has 6 open in federal investigations by this administration. They don't need a 7th. And they don't want their students to become the focus of that either. So it puts, so the attention's getting, it's hard to really for people to grasp what the scale of the risk is. We're using a terrorism statute as a foundation for then unplugging legal status.
Thank you, David. Real quick, if you are just now joining us, thank you so much for tuning into our Instagram Live with Sahan Journal. Today we have Hannah Ward, an investigative reporter with the Minnesota Daily at the University of Minnesota, and David Wilson, an immigration attorney with Wilson Law Group. Today we're going to be answering your questions about international students and their visa statuses, concerns, and infractions that are coming against them. David, I guess, like you said, universities are effectively a victim in this situation. They're trying their best. What are universities trying to do to protect or serve their international students that are coming under attack? if there's anything.
I mean, they're being very cooperative in helping us understand what's happening in the background. We can't see the data. They can. They have access to it. So to that extent, they've been very willing to communicate regularly about this change has happened. This is, and I say change because it's not been the same answer or the same approach all along. Starting in March, the initial indications were in an entry by an ICE officer somewhere saying you had violated, students violated their status, they failed to maintain status, background checks. And a few weeks later, as ICE is starting to get called out on this, they switched to other, just failure to maintain status, background checks, and it's kind of stepping back each step of the way. DSOs are important. The DSO is the designated school official at each university. That person has been very...
Can you tell me what DSO stands for?
Oh, designated school official.
Okay.
So that is basically someone authorized to access the system because it's really a government system at the end of the day. They've been very crucial, and they've been crucial in giving us updates about changes and almost collaborating in terms of saying this student's had this effect. When a court's made an order, confirming that there's actually been compliance with that order, things like that. And so the school has been trying to help. They can only go so far, though. At the end of the day, this is the student status. They're not the ones unplugging it. And so it's on the student then to decide, do they wish to push back? Do they want to just accept their fate and leave? And some students have chosen to leave. They've just said, this isn't worth it. But others have been very vehement, like, no, I've worked too hard. I'm not going to have this pulled out from underneath me for a parking ticket. This is stupid. It is stupid. But it's just, so the schools are, I don't envy school officials in this particular environment, but especially on this issue, because they have to walk a very fine line between maintaining their accreditation and then trying to help the students who have been targeted by a random data match.
Anna, have you spoken with any students who have felt this type of way? Like, just, it's not worth it, just giving up, effectively?
I would say there's one student who I know is a graduate student who has to return to his home country to do research, and he is very adamant about not letting this stop him. Like, he's still going to leave the country even if it means he can't return, even if there's no issues in his criminal history that should prevent him from returning to the United States. So that's one attitude I'm seeing, is kind of resilience and determination to kind of keep it business as usual. For other students, it's a lot of preparation, making sure documents are in order, following whatever advice they can get from the university, which is not a tremendous amount because they don't know why this is happening. So there's not a lot of questions they can answer for students besides what they can do to be prepared.
And from the school's perspective, you have to understand, as of up to last Friday, ICE was digging in on what you're maintaining your status. There's nothing to see here. Schools knew better. Lawyers knew better. By Friday, I think ICE was starting to accept, the federal court was picking up on that their response was nonsensical. So they had come out and said, all right, we're going to go back and manually fix all these records. Sometime Sunday night, they start coming up with a new policy. Don't know what, we didn't know what it is. Seen it now. All they've done is just shift who's the actor is what they've done. And so they're trying to, instead of putting lipstick on the pig, they're putting a little rosé or something else to make it look a little better. Yeah. It's not changing what they're really trying to do. They're trying to weaponize the ability to revoke a visa and then to use that to expedite someone's departure from the United States. And now they're linking it to SEVIS, and that's where they've gone way too far.
So for our audience, this is a little confusing of a situation. I was confused, and I've been trying my best to keep up to date on what the heck is happening. But on Friday, April 25th, Politico, other news outlets reported that the Trump administration reversed course and reinstated visa registrations for thousands of international students, right? But on Monday, Sahan reported that a new student visa policy was created Sunday evening, what David's talking about. However, that policy was unclear. According to New York Times, officials at the Department of Homeland Security had not restored any visas that had been revoked. David, if I remember right, from Becky Dernbach's reporting, even the Federation, the federal attorney from the Trump administration, was also confused on what the policy was, right?
The attorney speaking for the government, 'cause I don't want to call him a Trump lawyer. I don't know that he would want to be called a Trump lawyer.
Thank you for the question.
He's candidly, I don't envy his position right now, because he's trying to catch up with what is actually going on. He's just at the end of one case of many, and he's not the direct voice to Washington. He's getting the information through other people, and often he's literally asking me, "Hey, I've heard of this document. Have you seen it?" And I'm sharing it with him because I've seen it from other cases around the country. So they're trying to catch up. This new policy, though, we both were in the position yesterday in federal court of having to be candid with the court. We know it's coming. We know it's out there, but no one has seen it, and we don't know what impact it has on what we're doing. Now it's another day, and it's leaked out. We're aware of it, but I think there's going to be this constant changing of narrative by the government, which is only then creating more apprehension for students because they don't know what's happening today or tomorrow. The newspapers are not entirely correct. The New York Times, for example, you mentioned saying they're not reinstating visas, but they have some. They have reinstated some. Some they can't because the visas have expired. You can't reinstate something that's expired. But other cases they have, but selectively. And so in some cases, the data looks like they had restored them back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
The next person down the list, they only did it back to the date of the announcement. So there's a gap. So it's all over the place. There's no one actually owning this and taking control of it.
How does this affect your own work? Like, there's this huge level of confusion.
Well, I haven't resorted to chronic drinking yet, but I feel like I'm getting close. It's stressful. It's stressful to try to tell students, this is what you can expect tomorrow. Because that's often what, as lawyers, we're really asked to do is, what are my rights tomorrow? Not in this moment, but how do I live tomorrow? How do I go to class tomorrow? And expect that things are going to go back to some kind of normal. And just when we think we know the answer, it changes.
I have a question from the chat, and this is for either of you, whichever of you two feel most comfortable. How risky is it to return to the United States of America if I'm going to visit my family abroad? Many thanks. It's not an easy question, I know.
Well, the problem becomes, are you a permanent resident? Are you a student? There's a lot of different standards that apply. I think as a simple rule, if you're a student, you've ever been pulled over and charged with a misdemeanor for anything, then there's some risk.
That's a comforting thought.
Well, it's disconcerting, but at least you know, right? Because part of it, too, is this revocation policy that's kind of driving this in the background. They're invoking the authority to do silent revocations without telling the student. And so a student may go out thinking their visa is still valid, not knowing that the Department of State has quietly terminated it. And they won't know it until they get back to LAX, and CBP won't let them through, and they detain them. Then they're subject to mandatory custody or withdrawing their application and paying for their return flight right then and there. And so there's a lot of risk in that sense. If there has been any significant contact with police, other than, say, a speeding ticket or a parking ticket, someone should really check before they get on a plane.
I think just to add really quick, similarly, I would be, I think for any students who have like content on their like personal electronic devices that could put them at risk, that is related to, any like kind of protest activity I know is a concern, or speaking out, like especially pro-Palestine has been what drove this, like initially, I think, from Marco Rubio.
So the Minnesota Daily reported that the Student and Exchange Visa Program, the SEVI, a division of immigration. I'm sorry, this question's worded weirdly. The Minnesota Daily reported that SEVI's program has terminated students' exchange program. I don't know who wrote this question, and that's my bad. Give me 2 seconds. It's like weirdly worded.
It's a cliffhanger.
It's a cliffhanger. It's a great little question.
I can't wait.
The Minnesota Daily has reported that the Student and Exchange Visitor Program, a division of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, has terminated students and exchange visitor information systems records. Hannah, do you have any idea on why the heck this is happening? I'm dyslexic. I don't know how to read, by the way. That's my bad.
No, I do not know why this is happening, and neither does the University of Minnesota's International Student and Scholar Services group that helps international students and scholars. They don't know why it's happening. So they don't know how to help students either when students ask, what can I do to prevent this? Which is an issue. So they're limited in how they can help and do their job.
So then what has the university been telling these students? Just tossing their hands up, saying, like, best of luck?
There has been, I know they hosted a webinar in mid-April, and they have collected some information sheets on here's what you should do, know your rights with ICE, and then you might be able to add on here, but I know there's some key points that are important, like having your documents organized and keeping your immigration documents on you at all times, having an emergency contact who can access copies of the documents, and then having a number memorized for a lawyer you can call.
I mean, part of it, too, is the schools have been instructed for years to tell students, if your CVIS account's terminated, you've got to go. You're no longer maintaining status, so you need to make a decision whether you go voluntarily or wait till the government eventually finds you. So the initial messages were pretty strong from the schools because that's what they were programmed to say. They're trained on how to administer the CVIS program, and that was one of the messages from Homeland Security for the last 15 years. You violate, you go. It's just that simple. And, students were also getting messages at the same time from the Department of State. They're getting emails. And from wherever they got their visa. One that always will stand out for me is a Chinese student who went to Vancouver to get her visa there because you don't always have to go back to your home country. And she got an email after she already been told by school she's out. And this email said, you're no longer in status. You've been identified for background checks. You need to leave now. Because if you don't leave, we could deport you. We could even deport you to a third country.
Sorry, a third country?
Yeah, the El Salvador threat.
Oh.
Imagine as a student getting that. Imagine the political nightmare that sending a student from China to El Salvador would cause. I mean, you could incite a war with that kind of stuff. And they're sending this out as an automated email? That's as a lawyer, I'm just shocked at the stupidity, the lack of self-awareness as a government that we would send that kind of message, that we're going to treat people that way and threaten them. So students are rightfully pissed and scared because that kind of rhetoric is not something they would ever expect to get from a U.S. government office. That's something you get from maybe a Chinese government official, not the other way around. And so I think that has really fueled the climate and also part of the tension with the schools. They become aware of it saying, well, wait a minute, there's no way they're going to deport you this way. But we can't really tell you that either because we're still programmed to say a certain thing. So like going back to what Hannah was saying earlier about the mindset of students, a lot of students are hiding and they don't want attention. So you're not going to be able to get one on the radio, for example, or on a newscast. I've been asked numerous times, please give us a client to talk. I'm like, they do not want to become the poster child for this process in ICE and draw ICE to their doorstep at 5 a.m. No way. That's the last thing they want.
David, you're representing, correct me if I'm wrong, you're representing 2 student clients who had their legal status terminated in recent weeks, right?
There are 2 active cases here in Minnesota. I have another one in Madison, and we have represented many other students who are about to file last Friday but when we became aware of the new kind of shift in ICE's position, we held off because we wanted to see if ICE self-corrected in those cases, because we didn't want the pressure of a court process interfering with something that ICE may have just been fixing on their own. And it leaves the students without being identified that way, without becoming targets for ICE scrutiny. And the students, obviously, if they could see it fixed without having to go to court, they'd rather just do it that way. So there's still three pending that I represent. There's another group of 5 from Concordia. And there's another one for a couple of people who are detained as well.
And what have you been hearing from your clients? How are they feeling? You expressed that students have a right to be pissed. Are yours?
One in particular, she's very articulate, and she at first, her parents were like, well, you should come home. And she had thought about it for overnight, and she said, no, because in America, you can go to court. And I'm like, that's the way to live. Believe in the systems that make us who we are. Don't run from them. Use them. And so she's angry. She's upset. She's worried about what it's going to do to her graduate program. She's got offers from Ivy League schools. She's incredibly bright. And she doesn't want to see all this hard work fall apart. But she also doesn't want the government to just get away with it and force her hand. So there's this mixed emotions for a lot of students in that way. But there's some serious trepidation, though, with standing up. It's hard to be the face of something, and especially when you're fighting something as powerful as the federal government.
I have a question in the chat. Per the Constitution, international students are protected by the First Amendment. Correct me if I'm wrong here. How does the protection currently play out in the context of the immigration court? Hannah, you mentioned that you advise international students to maybe quietly delete anything that could be construed as inflammatory.
Well, not necessarily like me personally advising, but I know that that's a big concern, is having any material on your phone that can get you in trouble, especially if you're an international student traveling in and out of the country. I would just be considerate with what you bring with you.
Mm-hmm. David?
So I think what you're really seeing in a larger scale is the administration is trying to find any foothold or weapon, I'll call it weapon, within the Immigration Nationality Act that will allow it to control opinions, control people, and decide who are the desirables and who are not from their perspective. And there are provisions that are there that haven't been tested. The one that comes up often is this foreign policy one. That's where the freedom of speech, they collide together, where you have a First Amendment right to speak your mind, protest, but at the same time, the administration in the law seems to empower the Department of State to say, well, we revoked your invitation to do so here. And so that's where that has never been tested, and this administration is not shy about testing the law. And so that's where we find ourselves at this point. And that's not just on speech. That's where the DWI issue is coming up. This gross, massive expansion of what is public safety. Never had public safety raised in this way. Disorderly conduct cases now before the federal court. A simple, tussle with someone somehow a public safety concern for all of the United States. This is a massive overreach, attempted overreach. And so when you have the conflict of speech in the Constitution coming together with so much authority Congress has given to the Department of State to decide foreign policy initiatives and visa power, there's so much from 9/11 that we never really thought about what we're giving to the executive branch. This is one of those. This is from 2004. This has been lurking there, waiting for some executive branch to grab it. It's like putting a gun on the table and waiting for someone to eventually pick it up. It's been picked up. The problem is now getting it back in the holster. And that's where we're seeing this tension here with freedom of speech, the right to be a student. Sharing ideas is inherent to being a student.
Yeah.
Disagreement, resolving on finding common ground, all those things. And they're just trying to kill it. They're trying to kill it because they want control, right? And this is true of controlling the schools. I mean, this is, the students are kind of pawns in some ways. If you think about all that's going on with schools and the idea of we're going to decide what you're going to teach, what your standards are going to be. We want someone that we put in power. And at some point, the schools are going to have to come together and say, enough is enough, public institution or not. Look, this is on our ground. This is where we decide what we decide. Hopefully we're getting there. Seems like we're getting close. But I think the student visa is in some ways kind of accelerating the discussion. Hopefully, at least.
Hannah, real quick, we're about halfway through our discussion today. If you're just now joining us, thank you so much. My name is Alberto with Sahan Journal. We're here with David Wilson, a managing attorney at Wilson Law Group, and Hannah Ward, investigative reporter at the Minnesota Daily. Today we're discussing ICE and international students. If you're looking to learn more about the topic, you can always visit us at sahanjournal.com. And, of course, Hannah Ward has written extensively on this topic for the last how damn long?
Sometime in March, all the days just kind of blur together.
What was the first story that you had to write about?
It was the first student who was detained by ICE. And that was, I can't remember the date for the life of me. But I had learned about it. It was a Friday. The University of Minnesota sent out an alert about it around 5 p.m. And I had been kind of looking into it all day because one of my roommates is a graduate student, and it had got around like through her circles, and she was like, "Hey, this is kind of crazy. There's an international student who's been detained by ICE." I said, "Huh? What do you mean? You should be a little more energy with this." And so I was trying to find out all I could, and since then it's just been a series of more and more happening.
Was there a moment that particularly shocked you in some of your recent reporting?
I think I've mentioned it like earlier, but just the fact that the university doesn't know why this is happening, and that students are confused. I think the lack of clear information and sharing why this is happening, what's happening, is, concerning to me, like, as a journalist. Like, I think that should be a priority with all of this, and it's not.
Oftentimes journalists are asked to remain objective, keep your feelings out of this completely. You're just a witness to what is happening. But you've been covering Palestinian protests since last year. You've been the Daily's one of the common reporters to talk about international students and their own woes. But how's this been weighing on you? What does it feel like to be reporting on what sometimes feels tragedy after tragedy?
That's a good question. It's a little bit easier sometimes to tune out my own feelings. I enjoy going after a story that's important, and knowing that the work that I'm doing is benefiting people by letting them know what's going on. I think it gets tough when I really have to take a second to sit back and think about the cost it's having on the people that I'm writing about, and I have to make sure that I'm staying in touch, and I'm not just presenting something just writing about it because it's important, but because it's someone's livelihood that's being affected, and I need to take a second to have that register kind of emotionally.
David, first of all, thank you very much, Hannah. I really appreciate it. David, I've got a question from our chat for you. Our chatter would like you to explain the government's new policy that that you apparently just saw today. What is this vague new policy, and does it change anything? And if so, how? I'm not sure what this new policy is. Can you give me some context?
I can try. The new policy seems to be that ICE is announcing to all its stakeholders that it's now declaring that it has the power to revoke or terminate status in SEVIS once the Department of State has taken any action on a visa. They call it either a prudential revocation or a full revocation. Under the law, there really isn't a difference. It's dressing up things, but the fact of the matter, it's a revocation. And they're saying we don't need to tell a student; we can just do it. And that is, they haven't. And when we do that, we will then evaluate whether that person should be put in removal proceedings or not. Maybe we won't do it, but we're going to at least have the authority to do this interim step. They've just made a policy essentially reinforcing what they've been doing already, which they've just declared that they did wrong. So I think what they're trying to do is walk it back and say, well, we didn't intend to hit everyone that we did, the full database, all at once. But we did. That doesn't mean we're not going to keep trying to perfect it and start targeting people for certain offenses or crimes or contacts. And then when the Department of State is supposed to be the source of the alert, because they too can see the same data, the Department of State also sees SEVIS. Yeah. It's all, the SEVIS thing's all intertwined through all the relative immigration agencies. And so if the Department of State says, we see something, we issued a visa 10 years ago, we see a record pop up doing random checks or routine checks, it's tied to a student in Minnesota, revoke the visa. We revoke the visa. We transmit that to ICE. ICE then says, "Oh, they're still in school. Terminate the SEVIS account. Don't tell anyone. We don't have to tell anyone. We're not required to tell anyone."
Why aren't they required to tell anyone? Like, this is a major shift, right?
No, that's the problem with SEVIS, is that it doesn't have a notice provision to the student. The DSO is the messenger of the bad news. The question, though, is the DSO doesn't know what the heck is the message. Because right now the government can't decide if terminating SEVIS is actually then causing the student to no longer be a non-immigrant student at this point under the law. So they're saying we'll call it the Watson affidavit. It is, I'm trying to swear, this narrative that they've been trying to maintain that, in fact, just us deleting this record doesn't mean you're no longer a student. There's no explanation how anyone's supposed to function without this. It's like taking out your heart. Oh yeah, the body's still alive for a minute, but eventually it ends. Well, they're doing the same thing. They're just trying to whitewash it at this point, saying we're only doing it selectively. And so you might be at risk of deportation. That's worse than what they were saying before.
And then you just have something like hanging over your head.
Because
now.
you won't know as a student. It's like, well, I've had contact with the police. Now I have to worry about it every second of every day for the rest of the time I'm in the United States. That can't be what they're intending. That's the tenor of it. I'm sure they say that's overreach. That's not what we really meant to say. But the rhetoric and the tone is pretty strong. So if I were in court today instead of yesterday, and I had this awareness of it, I would have said, this doesn't change a single thing. This is exactly why we're here. Because they're trying to link visa revocations to SEVIS. There is no legal link between them. The SEVIS program was created for a specific purpose. It's monitoring and then enabling schools to manage a student's stay in the United States. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. It is not a gateway for creating a condition that forces a person to deport themselves. Fundamentally wrong. But they're trying to make it one. They're trying to build a bridge to nowhere. How's that? Use Sarah Palin for a moment.
Bridge to absolutely nowhere, and it's not leading anything. Hannah, on Thursday, April 7th, I'm looking at some of your articles. On April 27th, your fellow Minnesota Daily reporter, Tyler Church, covered a rally outside of Northrop Auditorium. Students, faculty, community members protested various issues, including defending students from ICE. What has been the atmosphere on campus? What was the air there from what you heard from Tyler?
It I mean, at the protest, there was a lot of energy. I know because some of the people there were are close friends, people who know the student personally, and then a lot of activists who are passionate. On campus generally, I think after that student was detained, since then, it has been, I don't want to say not a concern, because there have been, I'll say, like, one of my majors is geography. I know that's where one of the students who's facing issues is in one of the geography graduate programs. Our department hosted like a town hall, kind of having a community discussion. So there are events like that, but I wouldn't say there's like a widespread anger or passion for how to fight this. It's been a lot of like earnest conversations.
It's more just discussing that this is happening, and well, geez, it's happening. There's not much that can be done.
Yeah. A lot of making sure that students, I mean, especially international students, because there are more than 5,700 at the University of Minnesota, making sure they're informed and making sure that staff members and faculty know how to support them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Hannah. If you are just now joining us, we've got about 15 minutes left in our hour-long conversation with Hannah Ward, an investigative reporter at the University of Minnesota, and David Wilson, a managing attorney of Wilson Law Group. Today we're discussing international students, visas, and ICE. A very delightfully uplifting topic.
What can I add to what you're saying?
Yes, of course.
So there's another dynamic there, is that a student who isn't an international student really won't understand what's at stake.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if they're hearing all this discussion about CVIS and accounts and computers and data matching. It just sounds like a bad tax return. It doesn't sound like liberty. It doesn't sound like the capacity to fulfill your passion or finish your degree. And so until they see students who aren't on campus anymore, it's not real. It's not tangible to them. So when someone gets arrested, then they can see it. They can see that's government police, and that's very easy to attribute to a certain government action. I think it's very hard for students to appreciate the scale at which the government has taken action across students across the country in one fall swoop and just kicked a bunch of people off campus digitally. And so imagine canceling your life digitally. When you start talking to students in terms that they understand, iPhones, Android, whatever, then in having someone click a button and everything you'd worked for stops. That should make them mad, because if it's going to happen for that reason, why isn't it going to happen soon for something they said and they're tied to certain programs, and then they can't participate in that program because there's government money tied to the program, but you've had an opinion we don't like.
Mm-hmm.
It's not hard to fathom how this unravels and becomes completely untethered from reality, where students are just kicked out of so many opportunities, regardless of whether you're international or not. Mm-hmm. This is just kind of the first wave, it seems, in the government trying to assert what will be taught, by whom, and on what conditions.
So you expect this to get worse as the years go on?
I think that what you're seeing is that hopefully you're starting to see the universities start recognizing the importance of the moment, and starting to come together and really question, well, what is our role? We're going to have to do something. We're going to have to collectively take the risk of standing back, pushing back. Credit to Harvard for putting itself out there, but I think other schools are starting to see, well, wait, if Harvard's willing to do it, why aren't we? Yeah. Hopefully, there's already litigation by some states and schools challenging these CVIS terminations. It's been filed in Massachusetts. I think that's going to grow as the more the administration keeps pushing on students and schools schools are starting to realize they have to push back, maybe for the well-being of their students, but maybe for their own survival in the long run.
I've got a two-pronged question from our chat for you, David. Real quick, can you explain what optional practical training is?
This is like a final exam. Optional
Hope
practical.
studied.
No, well, I've been trying to lately. Optional practical training, OPT, we call it OPT, is a one-year opportunity for when a student finishes their respective programs to go find a job that's related to their major.
Mm-hmm.
So we're bringing up geography, for example. That person needs to find a job in geography, and the school has the power to authorize it. So students apply to the school official, the DSO. The DSO endorses an underlying document called an I-20, which is kind of like a driver's license for students. And then with that, the students allowed to get work permission, and for a year, and depending on the program, could be longer if it's a STEM program, they can go get experience in their field of endeavor. Mm-hmm. So optional practical training is a very powerful benefit of being an international student, but this is where CVIS comes in and why it's freaking out so many students, because so many students are on the cusp of qualifying for OPT, and they're losing it because of the CVIS action, because without an active CVIS, you can't get it.
So then how should OPT, or how should international students on OPT react to their statuses being revoked, basically losing this career opportunity?
Well, I mean, that's where ICE's position last Friday of stepping in should have restored it for them. Now the problem is it depends on what sense. Restored is the word I'm choosing to use, meaning taking action as if this never happened, because clearly they didn't intend for this database to go wild like it did. They're not necessarily doing that consistently. What they're doing instead is entering a reinstatement, which means there's a gap. Gaps matter in immigration. Mm-hmm. You have to maintain continuous status. Gaps can prevent you from then switching off a student visa onto a work-related visa, getting a green card, cutting off pathways off of being there that are legal pathways. And so if someone's on OPT and they were affected by this at one point, they really need to ask their DSO, I need the notes. I need the entry notes to understand whether there's a gap. Because if there's a gap, they can't just ignore it. It's going to come back to follow them. Mm-hmm. The problem has been whoever's doing the fixing is not consistent. Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not.
Hannah, the University of Minnesota has an International Student and Scholar Services Office, right? These people support international students, the international community. What advice is ISSS? Yeah. What advice is this office offering to students at this time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say just to restate like what I mentioned earlier about having your documents organized beyond just immigration documents, like any legal documents, having them, knowing where they are, making copies, having your immigration documents with you, like on your person, wherever you go, in case you're picked up by ICE on the street. Having a friend or emergency contact who will respond at, I don't know, any time of day if you're in need, who can access copies of those documents if you don't have them on you, and then to have the number for a lawyer memorized in case you have to make a call. Otherwise, there's also a student legal service that the University of Minnesota offers, and some students have been consulting with them, taking legal advice. So a lot of information sharing, and then hosting webinars, information sessions, taking student questions.
David, maybe you can offer some advice here. In the event that someone is preparing to possibly be detained by ICE, where could someone find a lawyer or any type of legal advice, protection?
I think having a game plan beforehand is important, because it's not as if they give you access to the internet when you're in custody to search for someone. The old image of the officer hands a stack of yellow page books to our telephone directories from the jail room floor to someone saying, pick your poison and call whoever you want. That doesn't happen anymore. I think that one thing that students should really keep in mind is, it's good for someone else to have a good scan of your passport biographic page so we know how your name is spelled. Hyphens, for example, can really make it hard to find someone in the detainee locator system. The correct date of birth. Some passports list day first versus month. Seeing the passport helps us really identify where is that person, just for the fundamental question, where are they? And in this day and age, that's really important because ICE moves people really fast.
Is it easy for you or people like you to lose clients?
They can go dark for a little bit when they're moving them between facilities, yes. And so you're trying to guess where they're doing. Now, as someone who's around the detain court quite a bit, you get wind of that this particular facility's full. They may be shifting people over here. Sometimes, like they were initially moving people to Aurora, Colorado. There's a big detention facility there. We started picking up on the pattern of when they were going to do it so we can anticipate it. But otherwise, if ICE is motivated for a particular person, it doesn't have to be a student, they're going to move them quick because they don't want a federal court getting their teeth into them.
We're reaching the end of our broadcast now, and I just want to thank both of you so much for taking the time out of your day to answer a lot of these questions. It's obviously very confusing and a little dizzying. Before we sign off, is there anything that I didn't get to ask the two of you, maybe that you want to throw in? Any other advice, anything you got? Hannah, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'd say something to bring up is, I think I mentioned there are more than 5,700 international students at the University of Minnesota. I think it's important to note that they pay $66,000 in tuition a year, which is more than twice as much as a Minnesota resident would pay. So they're bringing the university a large chunk of money. And obviously some of them come with financial aid from the university, some with financial aid from their home country. But it's a big chunk of cash that the university relies on.
And it's bigger than that. It's not just the school. Think about all the jobs in the community around the University of Minnesota. How much student housing there is. There is so much money tied into being just students. And a lot of that comes from overseas. Schools don't like to admit it, but they're subsidized by international students. And so if students from Minnesota don't want their tuition to go sky high in the next 2 years, they really need international students to help cost control. It's an unspoken element of, university level education, but it's the truth. They subsidize it. And they contribute, but they also subsidize it. And so from that standpoint, I think it's very, very important to note this. I mean, the economic toll this could take is significant. We're talking billions of dollars cumulatively across the country. This is not a small question that we're dealing with.
So are there other ways that the universities, not just University of Minnesota, but other smaller schools rely on support from international students, Hannah?
I would say one area that I've looked at so far is, I mean, this sort of answers your question, but like David said, with subsidizing, the amount of administrative staff at universities has grown a lot in the past couple decades, and that's one area where like international student enrollment has also grown during that time, and it makes those jobs possible. So even the international students who take jobs are contributing to the local economy, but also they make jobs within the university possible.
Mm-hmm. Right. I'm trying to think about how many of my TAs were international students or so on and so forth.
Well, and you must have seen posters for, when you went to college that, hey, you can go to this program abroad. Mm-hmm. The University of Minnesota's got a relationship with somewhere in Australia. Yeah. Those are relationships that will be tested if we're taking Australian students and then locking them up or, disinviting them as soon as they arrive. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of interconnectivity in the academic world that, we're a global economy. We're also a global education system in many respects. And this puts a lot of strain on it. It makes it very hard for American universities, public or private, to really maintain those and keep our foreign friends, who, academic institutions, feeling comfortable that these relationships are worthwhile. And so there's just so much that we're sending so many bad messages out to the world these days. This is just one of the loudest ones, unfortunately.
So it's going beyond just international students. It's showing other educational institutions that maybe they shouldn't be partnering with U.S. universities, basically.
Well, it threatens to do that. I mean, there are already, conversations with school administrators, with children, and parents overseas who are contemplating sending their students for the next semester, for the fall. And they're really second-guessing it because they don't understand what's happening. And so the lack of clarity from the government is not helping either in terms of selling the next semester. And so that's going to manifest and, it's going to eventually spread into other relationships, which I'm sure would include the ability to partner with schools overseas. And you also have to think, then, how are the foreign governments going to react to our students? Governments love tit-for-tat kind of stuff. What goes around comes around. And I just think for American students, this also doesn't help you either going overseas.
Thank you both so much for your time. Hold on. I wrote a little intro, and I want to use it real quick because I think it'd be cute. Thank you both so much for hopping on today. David Wilson, we had David Wilson, a managing attorney at Wilson Law Group, and Hannah Ward, an investigative reporter at the University of Minnesota newspaper, the Minnesota Daily. We're going to have a recap article and the video of this conversation available for you all later. I hope you stay up to date on the latest news about immigration and other topics impacting immigrants and communities of color in Minnesota at sahanjournal.com. Thank you so much for coming on our little show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.